I will begin my project with a statement from the judge that includes details of the case and instructions to the jury. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Before beginning this trial, I am going to address your role here today. As the judge in this case, it is my responsibility to interpret and judge the law. As the jury, you are the judges of the facts, and it is your responsibility to analyze the presented evidence. You must begin with the presumption of innocence and understand the requirement of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The case you will be deliberating on is that of the kidnapping and murder of Veronica Matthews, represented by the state, by the defendant Charles Hunter. Mr. Hunter is charged with 2 crimes, kidnapping and first-degree murder. Mr. Hunter is presumed to be innocent until the state can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he is guilty of the charges. The responsibility is on the state to prove each element of the crime. Because of the presumption of innocence, the defendant is not responsible to prove he is not guilty or explain the evidence presented by the state. In order for you, the jury, to find Mr. Hunter guilty, the state must prove the following elements beyond a reasonable doubt. That on October 1st, 2019, Charles Hunter kidnapped Veronica Matthews, that the kidnapping was against her will, and that Mr. Hunter possessed intent to confine Miss Matthews, and that on October 10th, 2019, Charles Hunter murdered Miss Matthews after 10 days of confinement with the intent to harm and kill. The state must also prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant had the intention to deprive Miss Matthews of liberty to move from point to point, and ultimately took the liberty of life from Miss Matthews. I will now call the prosecution to begin their case. State opening statement. Members of the jury, myself and my colleagues represent Veronica Matthews in the case before you. We intend to call several witnesses to testify before you to prove that the accused, Charles Hunter, kidnapped Miss Matthews on October 1st and later murdered her on October 10th after confinement. In the early hours of October 1st, 2019, Veronica Matthews engaged in her daily morning routine. She woke before the rest of her family, which includes her husband Timothy Matthews and their 2 kids, Elizabeth and Dominic, and began getting ready for the day. She woke her kids, prepared breakfast, and saw her husband off to work at the usual time of 7:30. After dropping her kids off at school at 8:15, she returned home alone to finish getting ready for work, not knowing that would be the last time she saw her family. Before Miss Matthews could even enter her own home, she was blitz-attacked in her driveway by the defendant, Charles Hunter. The defendant took Miss Matthews to his isolated property, which is located 25 miles away from the closest town. When Timothy Matthews came home from work later that day before leaving to pick up their 2 kids from school, he noticed Veronica's car was still in the driveway, and blood and her cell phone were found on the front porch. After calling 911 and beginning the investigation, Veronica Matthews was deemed a missing person by October 2nd. For the next 10 days, Miss Matthews was held captive. During her confinement, she was neglected, threatened, starved, degraded, and abused, and on the evening of October 10th, the defendant took her life. The morning of October 11th, the body of Veronica Matthews was found 15 miles away from Charles Hunter's property, in a ditch not too far from the road that led straight to his home. You will be asked whether the United States has proven the allegations in the indictment. You will base your verdict on evidence that will be presented in this trial, the testimony of witnesses, physical evidence, photographs, and stipulations that are merely agreements between the United States and the defense counsel. Because Veronica Matthews cannot be here to tell her excruciating and tragic story, you will hear from witnesses that were involved in the case. You will hear from Veronica Matthews' mother, and you will learn about the kind and successful woman she was. You will hear from the lead detective on the case, and you will learn about the meticulous work that was put in by the state and the community in attempts to find Miss Matthews. And you will hear from others with similar insight. You will be presented with the evidence of Charles Hunter's plan and intent to kidnap and kill Veronica Matthews. Evidence will be presented from his online presence and research, forensic evidence including his DNA found at the crime scene, and photographs of where he confined and tortured Miss Matthews on his property. Please keep your focus, pay close attention to the evidence and testimony, and as the judge instructed, please keep an open mind. At the end of the evidence, we will speak to you once more. We'll be asking you to return a verdict consistent with your oath and responsibility of jurors. The state will be asking you to return a verdict that the accused is guilty of kidnapping and first-degree murder. Thank you. Defense opening statement. Members of the jury, it is my privilege to represent the accused, Charles Hunter, in this case. You have just heard from the state that my defendant is responsible for the kidnapping and death of Veronica Matthews. And as tragic of circumstances as that is, there is no way that can be proven. my narration, I decided to focus primarily on the state's opening statement. Typically, the defense would go into detail about how the evidence is not strong enough to tie the defendant to the crime, and provide insight on the defendant's life, attempting to prove that his reputation and credibility in the community reflects his life and behavior. Thank you. The state prosecution calls Diane Adams to the stand. Prosecutor stands and approaches the witness box. State witness questioning. Miss Adams, what is your relationship to the victim, Veronica Matthews? She is my daughter. Can you tell us a little bit about your daughter? Veronica is one of my 3 daughters. She was the kindest of us all, always so gentle and caring. She was so understanding and always looked to help people. If you ever needed anything, she was the one you asked to help you. I was so proud of her when she landed her dream job and stayed so successful when she had my 2 grandbabies. So you and your daughter were close. Very much so. We had always gotten along beautifully. You 2 talk often on the phone about life and see each other every week, correct? Yes, we never go more than a few days without a phone call. So can you tell us about your conversation on October 1st, 2019? I look back on that day as one of the worst days of my life. It started out as usual. Veronica called me on her drive back home from dropping the kids off at school. We chatted about the kids and what we both had to do that day. She was excited to go off to work because she had just been promoted to lead a research project for her company. And she was even more excited to get home that afternoon because every year on October 1st, her and her husband took the kids to get their Halloween costumes. When she got home from dropping the kids off, she said someone approached her as she got out of her car. She told me to wait a minute while she asked them what they needed. What happened next? She must have held her phone down because I couldn't hear quite well, but it sounded as if the person was trying to get Veronica to do something, but I couldn't hear the conversation. Miss Adams, is it possible that your daughter could have been approached by Charles Hunter, and if he asked for her assistance, she would have said yes? Defense objection, speculation of a third party. Judge, your objection is noted, but I will allow the question. You may answer. Of course, if anyone looked in need or asked Veronica for help, she would have been eager to do anything she can. That was just the type of person she was. Then what happened? After a couple seconds of silence, I heard the most horrid sound. Something or someone hitting my daughter. Then I could hear her try to run away and another horrid, blunt sound, and the phone dropped and the call ended. Thank you. The state has no more questions. Judge, does the defense wish to cross-examine the witness? Yes, Your Honor. Defense witness cross-examination. Miss Adams, you say that you heard your daughter speaking to the subject, correct? Yes. Did you ever hear the subject speak? No, I could only hear my daughter. Then how could you be sure that it was even a man? I guess I can't be sure. And how could you be sure that those sounds you heard over the phone were actually someone hitting your daughter? If you couldn't hear the conversation, then there is no proof that you heard what you think you did. But it was louder, I could hear it. But you can't be sure. You were not there, and you did not see what happened, and you cannot be sure. No further questions, Your Honor. Judge, would the prosecution like to re-examine their witness? No, Your Honor. Defense witness questioning. The defense calls Becky Hunter to the stand. Miss Hunter, what is your relationship to the defendant? He is my husband. Tell the court how long you 2 have known each other and how long you have been married. Charles and I met when we were 14 years old, freshman year of high school. We got married in college and have been together for 12 years now. Can you tell us a bit about Charles and your marriage with him? Of course. Charles is the hardest working man I know. He is always trying to be better and support everyone around him. He is a total mama's boy and goes to visit his mom every weekend. Him and I want to have kids, but we've had some trouble getting pregnant. But I know he would be the very best father. So you and Charles are happy and even looking to start a family together. Has Charles ever done anything that would make you think he was capable of committing such a heinous act? Never. Charles could never hurt anyone. And where were you on October 1st at the time of the alleged kidnapping? I was with Charles. We were getting breakfast before he could take me to the airport to attend my best friend's bachelorette party. What time was your flight? 1 in the afternoon. And where were you going? Arizona. And when did he drop you off at the airport? We were running a little late after breakfast, and we didn't get to the airport until almost 12. So you were with Charles all morning and until almost 12. Let the court understand that this is well after the time of the alleged kidnapping of Veronica Matthews. Judge, does the state wish to cross-examine the witness? Yes, Your Honor. State cross-examination. Miss Hunter, you said that you and Charles got breakfast before having him drop you off at the airport on October 1st, correct? Yes. I'm going to show you something, Miss Hunter. Do you recognize this? Yes, that is my credit card statement. Miss Hunter, can you please read to us the charges on your credit card statement for September 31st, 2019? $50 United Airlines baggage check. $11.64 Starbucks. $16.98 Panera at DIA. So you were actually at the airport on September 31st, 2019 for your flight to Arizona to meet your friend. Yeah, no, I mean, Well, according to this visa statement, you were at the airport on your way to Arizona on September 31st, meaning that there is no way you were with Charles the next day on October 1st. Well, no, but I know he didn't do it. Let the court understand that the alibi of Charles Hunter is no longer credible and accurate. We have no further questions. At this point, the pattern of witness questioning would continue until all witnesses testified. The defense would then present their closing argument. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, earlier you heard from witnesses and were presented with an abundance of evidence about the kidnapping and murder case of Veronica Matthews. And the defense tried to tell you that there just isn't enough evidence to convict Charles Hunter of the crimes. And maybe there is some doubt in your mind that he didn't do it. But let me remind you that Charles Hunter has a history of online research of torture, that his alibi for the day of the kidnapping was a lie constructed by the defense, and that his DNA was accurately linked to the crime scenes. Charles Hunter kidnapped and murdered Veronica Matthews. We ask you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that after you consider all of the evidence that is before you, that you return a verdict of guilty of the charge of kidnapping and murder. The crimes committed against Miss Matthews were unimaginably horrid, and her family will never get to see her come home again. Don't let Charles Hunter have the privilege of going home to see his. Thank you. Judge's instruction to the jury. I will now turn to my jury. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that concludes the evidence in this case. You have heard evidence from the state that the accused kidnapped Veronica Matthews. When you retire to deliberate, the first question you must consider is whether the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt the elements of the charge of kidnapping and murder. If you remember, you must consider several elements. You must decide whether a kidnapping occurred such that the victim was moved from place to place and more than simply confined. You must decide whether it was Mr. Hunter that perpetrated the kidnapping. You must decide whether he did so with any of the three required intents: intent to confine, intent to move Veronica, or intent to hold her for ransom or service. Finally, you must decide whether this kidnapping was against Veronica's will, and you must decide if Mr. Hunter was the one who murdered Veronica Matthews on October 10, 2019. Remember, it is the state's responsibility to prove that Charles Hunter is guilty, not the defense's responsibility to prove his innocence. If you find that the state has proven all of these elements beyond a reasonable doubt, you must find Mr. Hunter guilty of kidnapping and murder. You may now proceed to the jury for deliberation. When you have reached a verdict, please inform the sheriff. He will inform the court that you are ready to return to the courtroom to announce your verdict. Jury deliberations, leading to the jury finds the defendant guilty of both charges, kidnapping and first-degree murder.